One of the most important literary, artistic, cultural movements in the United States in the 20th century is the Harlem Renaissance. Now, I hate names sometimes because it kind of wasn't a renaissance. It was more of a naissance. Harlem is an area of New York. It's a little neighborhood in New York that dates all the way back to the Dutch settlers who founded New York, named after the city of Haarlem in the Netherlands, in fact. But eventually, over time, and particularly after World War I, when a lot of African Americans left the South, moved north for jobs and opportunity in cities like Chicago and Detroit and Seattle and Cincinnati and New York, enclaves. Of course, it was very segregated at the time. There were whole neighborhoods that were populated by African Americans. Harlem was an area that was kind of an older area, and so as African Americans moved in, it became a predominantly African American neighborhood and became one that was very vibrant economically. It was culturally a very interesting place. It was, if you were a young African American musician, writer, artist, philosopher, educator, you wanted to be in Harlem because it was where everything was at. African Americans from all over the country were coming there in droves, and it was where everything was going on. It was like being in, San Francisco or California in the 60s. It was, like being in Boston in the 1830s. It was just where things were happening, right? The jazz movement, all these wonderful things that were going on during that time. Fantastic writers, all over the place. And Hurston was one of them. Hurston's career was a somewhat short-lived but brilliant career. Sadly, like Parker, she died largely in obscurity. It happened a lot with the writers in the early 20th century. They didn't always maintain their fame. But Hurston was an influential writer during that period of time. She lived during the heyday of the Harlem Renaissance. People would go from the suburbs into Harlem to places like jazz clubs like the Cotton Club and things of this nature. And the music scene drew musicians from all over the South. It was like a magnet. It really was. And artists and performers, dancers. Josephine Baker gets her start there. All of these fantastic people did, and so I've selected a short story here in our anthology from her that I think is an interesting one because, number one, it's very much like Hurston, right? It was like a lot of her fiction, and secondly, it's a nice, neat, well-crafted story. It's got like one main goal. You get to it in the end. Everything ties together. The irony is there. The character development's there. It's a really great, tight, neat package of a short story. Think about that for a moment. We haven't really spent a whole lot of time talking about narrative skill, but this is a well-told story. Everything's sort of set up in the right kind of sequence. Think about how the piece is put together, and then you step back and appreciate that it's a tidy little piece. It's ironic and kind of gruesome at the end, right? But it's a really interesting piece in that regard because it's crafted well. So we have Delia, right, and her husband Sykes, and they don't have the best of relationships. And I'm going to invite you at the end here to think about the significance of the title, just as I did with Parker's short story. Here it's probably even more obvious what the title is. But Delia's been working and working and working, doing laundry for white people mostly, earning money because she is, even though when she was younger and married Sykes, she was youthful and vivacious and full of life and attractive, and over the years the hard work has taken its toll on her, and physically but also psychologically and mentally, and the bad relationship she has with Sykes, who's just a no good guy, run around on her, drinks all the time. Everybody in town, in fact, knows. Everybody knows what he's like. They all know, and when they see her coming by, they think, poor lady's married to Sykes. He's no good. Poor thing. How long is she going to put up with that? His reputation is all over the place. And of course, he takes up with a floozy and wants Delia to leave the house. Problem is, Delia's not going anywhere, because Delia says, you know what, my hard work paid for this house. And that's what she's really focused on, is paying for that house, getting it paid for, making sure that she has a small place of her own so that when she's older, she's got the comfort of knowing she owns her own place. And all that hard work and all that laundry she's been doing, all that sweat, right, there it is, has gone towards something. She doesn't have love and romance in her life anymore. She doesn't have fame or riches. She doesn't have her youth and her beauty anymore. But she has that house. And the house becomes this incredibly important symbol in the story of something. What? What does it become a symbol of? Well, I think you could go a lot of different directions. It's not just the symbol of just one thing. It symbolizes her independence. It symbolizes her triumph over her adversity. It symbolizes her life, that she started with nothing and she's making something of herself. She's, it's the house that sweat built, right? It's the house that hard work built, that sacrifice built. It's the house, and of course we go back to this, especially in prior generations, maybe so, I don't know, it is with my wife, that women sometimes look at their homes as an extension of themselves. We talked about this with Bradstreet and others, as an extension of themselves. It's kind of an expression of who they are, right? I mean, the kind of home you own and what you put in it and the thought that you give to it, you're thinking about things like the family that you want to raise there, or the life you want to live there, and it becomes an expression of who you are and your personality. And this is extremely important to a lot of women, or has been historically anyway, not to everybody. And so for Delia, it is as well. So it becomes this projection of who she is. It's also kind of a sort of a stand that she takes, that this is mine. The rest of the world can beat me up and mistreat me and discriminate against me and treat me rough, but you can't take this away from me. But Sykes thinks he can. And you find out later he's really wrong, and does some horrible things. He tries to humiliate her out of the house. He tries to bring in another woman. He even says, once she's gone, honey, this is going to be our little love nest. And Delia says, you're not getting it. You're not getting it. I'm not leaving. And that's when things get rather nasty, because practical jokes end up being not so funny. So he thinks he'll bring in a rattlesnake. Of course, this is her neck of the woods. Hurston's from North Florida, and this is where this is all set down in there. You've got these Florida rattlesnakes down there. We think in Texas that we have all the rattlesnakes. We don't. Florida has its fair share. Believe me, eastern rattlesnakes are pretty nasty too, and there are plenty of them down there, and he thinks he's going to scare the living you-know-what out of her. And he does. He succeeds in doing that, because he knows of all things, the thing she doesn't like is snakes. She doesn't like them. Well, what begins as a practical joke becomes some sort of technique for potentially getting her out of that house, right? You put that snake in there and she'll go away. She won't want to live in a house where she doesn't know whether there's going to be a snake in there or not. And of course, he delivers that snake in a basket, and we don't know whether he thought maybe she'll get bitten by it, maybe she'll just be scared, maybe she'll get the message, maybe she'll be intimidated and decide to give up and go. All she's thinking at the time is, I gotta get out of here because I don't like snakes, right? And so she runs off to the barn. Well, but then Sykes comes home, a little bit drunk. She's taken the only lamp out of there that was lit. One of them blows out. He can't find his way around, and she knows that one of the things that rattlesnakes do is they rattle. And the problem is they're like a ventriloquist, she says, and that is, you don't really know where the snake is when it rattles. You just know he's somewhere. And if you guess wrong, and you think he's to your right and you step left, and you're wrong, that's going to hurt. Or you step back when he's behind you when you thought he was in front of you, that's no good. And Sykes knows what a problem he's in for, because he doesn't have a match. Left everything at Bertha's, didn't he? Now he comes into a dark house, and he doesn't think anything of it until he hits a pot or a pan and it falls on the floor, and he doesn't just hear the clang, he hears the rattle. And that's the end of that, right? Now he's in a jam. What's he going to do? Well, he takes his chances and jumps up on the bed. Oops, bad guess. Too bad for you. And in fact, a rattlesnake won't kill a grown man. usually, unless he has some sort of reaction to it, unless it bites him in just the right place, like the neck or a femoral artery or something like that, where that poison goes straight into his system. And what happens at the end? Well, Delia is not a hero. In fact, she's kind of sitting back horrified, wondering, what should I do? Should I do something? Should I rush in there? But the terror of it, the terror he created, by the way, so he's got nobody to blame but himself if she's not rushing back in there, because there's a snake in there. He chose the one thing she hated, the one thing she feared the most. And guess what? When you do that, don't think she's going to run into the house to help you no matter how much you cry out, because you're the one that chose the thing that would keep her outside. And so your help isn't coming, my friend. He says, if only I could scratch a light. The rattling ceased for a moment. He stood paralyzed. He waited. It seemed that the snake waited also. Oh, for the light. Oh, thought he'd be too sick. When the whir began again, closer, right underfoot this time. Long before this, Sykes' ability to think he had been flattened down to primitive instinct, and he leaped onto the bed. Outside, Delia heard a cry that might have come from a maddened chimpanzee. A tremendous stir inside there, another series of animal screams, the intermittent whir of the wet reptile. She lay there. Delia! Delia! She could hear Sykes calling in a most despairing tone as one who expected no answer. He called. Delia could not move. Her legs were gone flabby. She never moved. He called, and the sun kept rising. My God, she heard him moan. My God from heaven. Delia, is that you? Right? Are you here? She saw him on his hands and knees as soon as she reached the door. He crept an inch or two around toward her, all that he was able, and she saw his horribly swollen neck and his one open eye, shining with hope. A surge of pity too strong to support bore her away from that eye that could not fail to see the tubs. Right? What's the last thing he sees? The wash tubs. Right? Isn't that interesting? There's some irony for you. I mean, you figure that out. The last thing he sees are those wash tubs. The thing that built that house, the thing that he resented so much, his pride, whatever. He could see the lamp. Orlando with its doctors was too far. She could scarcely reach the chinaberry tree, where she waited in the growing heat, while inside she knew the cold river was creeping up and up to extinguish that eye. Right? He's getting cold. He's dying. To extinguish that eye, which must know by now that she knew. Right? So one of the last things he sees is the tub, and one of the last things he realizes is, yep, she is out there. She's just not coming to help. Now, of course, oh dear, this story is one where everybody debates the ending and says, wait a minute, there's no question he was a bad guy, but she should have tried to help. Okay, so there's lots of different ways you can approach that. I think she leaves it purposefully kind of open-ended at the end, ethically, to let you draw your own conclusions. Did Delia do the right thing? Could Delia have done anything different? Right? Could she have overcome her fear and helped him? Would it have done any good to help him? Or did she basically just stand back in shock and horror at what happened and could have at least tried? I mean, she stayed away. She knew what was going to happen in there. She knew. She knew there was a rattlesnake in there. She knew it was loose. She knew he couldn't see it. She knew he was going to be bit. She could have called out. She could have tried to go and give him a lamp, but she didn't do it. She didn't do it. Was it that she was paralyzed with fear? If she was, should she have overcome that? I don't know. Lots of really interesting, but that's what makes the short story so interesting, because a lot of people can disagree about it and say, no, she couldn't have done a thing. And it's like, yeah, she could have, but she didn't, right? And what does that make her culpable? Or even if she could have done something and chose not to, even if she chose not to, if she had the ability and just didn't want to, is she still morally culpable for his own death when he's the one who put that in there, right? I mean, if you get shot by your own gun by accident when you were trying to kill somebody else, whose fault is that, right? So it's an interesting piece, interesting because it's so well made. You see, it ends with the irony that the title ties in nicely. The character development is quick, sharp, clear, very well defined, great storytelling at its best. Okay, all right, but that gives you a chance to see at least two. I mean, I wish we had more time for some more, but we're going to move on to another topic with lecture 8. In the meantime, we just have 2 questions for the quiz number 7. What is veronal and why is it important? Don't forget the second half of that question. What is veronal and why is it important? And then how does Sykes die? Right. So hopefully you guys I've been paying attention, right? That's what these quizzes are all about. Are you paying attention? Are you doing the reading? Send that to me to my email by Tuesday at noon, if you would, please.